I am the real young master who was mistakenly switched at birth. At the moment I learned I was actually the rich second-generation heir of a powerful family. I almost wanted to kneel on the spot and kowtow to the fake young master, Makoto. After all, it was Makoto who went through tremendous effort to find me and bring me back. However, the reason he was being so kind was simply because he had his eyes on Willow, the top star of the nightclub scene. Not only did he shower her with money, tips, and expensive gifts, he even made a high-profile marriage proposal, determined to bring her home as his wife. Ito's father was furious and absolutely refused. He even declared, "If you want to marry Willow, then you're no longer my son." So, inside the luxurious villa, Makoto slammed 2 paternity test reports onto the coffee table. He said, "George is your real son. I have no blood relation to you at all. Now I can marry Willow, right?" After saying that, he pulled me over in one swift motion, looked at me with eyes full of wisdom, and said, 18 years ago, we were switched at birth. So I'm not your son, and you have no right to control who I marry. Got it? Ito's father was left speechless. Chapter 1. When Makoto found me, I was standing on a rooftop, letting the wind blow against me. In July, J City was both hot and humid. Having just gotten off a night shift, I looked worn out and miserable. Anyone who didn't know better might have thought I was some kind of vagrant. Compared to these rich second-generation heirs in front of me, it felt like we belonged to completely different worlds. So he's your parents' biological son? One of the guys beside Makoto looked skeptical. He said, "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Your parents are both respectable people. How could they have a kid like this?" Another one chimed in. Exactly. Someone like Makoto is the only one worthy of being the Ito family's heir. Unlike them, however, Makoto Ito seemed extremely satisfied with my condition. He walked up to me, nodded slightly, and said, "You and I were switched at birth. You're the real son of my parents." His face was full of disdain, as if he were condescendingly tossing me a favor from above. But the words he spoke felt like a beam of light warming my entire world. Makoto Ito had already introduced himself earlier. His parents owned the Ito Group, worth tens of billions. If what he said was true, then I was the heir to a massive fortune. I couldn't help but frown. I couldn't believe that something with odds lower than winning the lottery would actually happen to me. And why was it Makoto who came to find me, instead of the Ito parents? In TV dramas, wouldn't the fake young master usually try everything to prevent the real one from being found? After all, it would threaten their inheritance. As if he had read my thoughts, Makoto curled his lips into a smug smile and said, "Listen, don't think that just because you were born to my parents, you're automatically part of the Ito family. Things like family bonds take time to build, and you're nothing more than a stranger with shared blood." He continued, "If you can actually take even a fraction of their attention away from me, I'd have to thank you." Halfway through, he gave me a disdainful once-over. "But you." The guys around him couldn't hold back their laughter, hearing their signature rich kid snickers. I lowered my head, where they couldn't see. I couldn't help but curl my lips into a grin as well. On the way to the Ito residence, Makoto and his friends chatted the entire time. They went from yachts to supercars, then from supercars to luxury watches. I listened carefully and memorized everything. After all, this would all be closely tied to my life from now on. Later, they started talking about women. That didn't interest me. I fell asleep. When I opened my eyes again, they were talking about their scandalous adventures skiing in Switzerland last year. From their conversation, I finally pieced together the truth of the situation. Chapter 2. The Ito family had 2 children in total. Aside from Makoto, there was also an older sister. Makoto could be described as the textbook example of a wealthy heir. From what his friends said, whether it was luxury cars, mansions, yachts, or even private jets, anything Makoto wanted, his parents would give him without hesitation. But when it came to relationships with women, Ito's father was extremely strict. After all, the biggest taboo in wealthy families was having illegitimate children. So, having little experience with romance or nightlife, Makoto fell in love at first sight with Willow, a younger foster sister his friend brought along during a skiing trip last year. Even after finding out she worked in the nightclub scene, he didn't care in the slightest. Not only did he spend lavishly on her, showering her with tips and gifts, he even made a public, high-profile proposal, determined to marry her and bring her home. Of course, this was immediately met with strong opposition from both Ito's father and mother. Ito's father flew into a rage, firmly refusing, and declared, "If you want to marry Willow, then you're not my son." It was originally just something said in anger. But Makoto took it to heart. He went to get a paternity test done, intending to fake the results and deceive Ito's father. But when he got the report, he discovered something shocking. He truly wasn't Ito's biological son. In disbelief, He immediately did another test overnight, this time with Ito's mother. The result was even more absurd. He wasn't her biological son either. So, he came to find me. After I woke up, one of Makoto's friends nudged me with his elbow and asked, "Hey, you beggar-looking guy, ever been skiing?" I shook my head and let out a sheepish grin. Forget skiing, I've never even seen snow. Hearing my response, they burst into laughter again. One of them said, "Well, figures. Someone at his level would never have access to a high-end sport like skiing." The guy who nudged me shrugged at Makoto and said, "Makoto, if your family ends up with a fool like this, I honestly feel embarrassed for you and your parents." Makoto frowned and glanced at me, as if he already found me disgraceful. This time, I didn't laugh along with them. I turned my head and looked out the car window. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, because I was always working overtime, living and eating at construction sites. My clothes were worn out, and I was covered in dust. I looked like someone who had just escaped from disaster. Makoto was right. I really am just a broke loser, a pathetic bum. But thanks to them, this pathetic bum just struck it big out of nowhere. Even a loser like me is about to turn things around. Chapter 3. The car drove into the villa district and stopped in front of the largest mansion. I couldn't help but look around. Even though I had mentally prepared myself, I was still so stunned by the sheer luxury that I couldn't say a word. Seeing my awestruck, inexperienced reaction, Makoto sneered and said, "You country bumpkin, when you meet my mom later, you can call her madam or ma'am, just don't call her mom. Let me make this clear, just because you're their biological son doesn't mean you're suddenly the young master of the Ito family." He sighed and added, "I don't even know if my sister is home. She's a clean freak. If she sees how filthy you look, she'll probably be disgusted to death. Someone as neat and tidy as my sister having a brother like you, that's just embarrassing." I quietly followed behind him, not arguing, not replying, because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd burst out laughing. The Ito residence was enormous. Makoto Ito led me through it for quite a while before we finally reached the dining room. Unlike the flashy European-style mansions I'd seen in videos, this place exuded understated elegance and refinement everywhere. In the kitchen, a woman walked out carrying a tray. She was well-maintained. Time had only left faint traces at the corners of her eyes. Seeing her, Makoto immediately put on a playful grin and walked up to her. "Mom, why didn't you go shopping today?" The woman shifted slightly and replied irritably, "Who do you think it's because of? Your father said he wants to have a proper talk with you today." Makoto's eyes lit up. He agreed to let me marry Willow. "Don't even think about it." Before Ito's mother could respond, a stern male voice came from behind me. "Makoto, as long as I'm still your father, don't even dream of bringing that nightclub hostess into the Ito family." I turned around abruptly and saw a face that looked 70% like mine. He slowly walked down the stairs. When he saw me, his expression paused for a moment. Then he smiled politely and nodded. "You must be Makoto's friend. Please, have a seat." My hand tightened instinctively inside my pocket. He looked like me, and yet not quite. There was a kind of presence about him, something that radiated from the inside out. Ito's mother placed the tray on the dining table, and only then did I notice it was a plate of sweet and sour pork ribs. Makoto let out a cold snort. "Didn't you say it yourself? If you weren't my dad, I could marry Willow." Ito's father's expression instantly darkened. He shouted sharply, "Keep talking nonsense like that and see if I don't break your legs." Ito's mother hurriedly pulled Makoto over. All right, what are you two doing? Can't you talk things through properly? You father and son just met and you're already arguing again." "Makoto, hurry and try the sweet and sour ribs I made for you. It was your favorite when you were little." Makoto showed no appreciation at all, muttering, "Who wants to eat that crap?" Hearing this, Ito's father grew even angrier. Through gritted teeth, he said, "If I cut off your allowance, you'll behave yourself." Unexpectedly, those words completely set Makoto off. He suddenly stood up, flipped the dishes on the table over, and snapped back defiantly. "Why the hell would I care about your damn money? You're not my dad. Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" Chapter 4. The living room fell into a deathly silence. The ribs lay scattered across the floor, thick sauce slowly spreading outward. Makoto pulled out the paternity test from his pocket and slammed it onto the coffee table. "I was switched at birth. He's your real son. Now I can marry Willow, right?" Ito's father and mother stood there, stunned, unable to process what they had just heard. Seeing their reaction, Makoto grew completely impatient. He grabbed me and shoved me forward. With irritation, he said, 18 years ago, we were switched at birth, so I'm not your son, and you have no right to control who I marry. Got it?" Caught off guard, I met Ito's mother's eyes. She stared at me for a moment, then reached for the report on the table. The paper was clearly light. Yet she tried twice and still couldn't pick it up. In the end, Ito's father steadied her and picked up the report himself. The living room fell silent again. The only sound was the repeated flipping of pages. Makoto, are you lying to us? Makoto cut her off impatiently. Where would I even find someone who looks this much like you? Don't tell me you can't even recognize your own son. Whatever. Take your time with your family reunion. I've still got to go to Switzerland with Willow. If I keep wasting time, I'll miss my flight. As he ran toward the door, he didn't forget to shout back. Oh, and Mom, don't let Dad cut off my card. Makoto left the villa without any obstruction. Ito's father wanted to chase after him, but Ito's mother grabbed his arm. From the moment she finished reading the report, her gaze had never left my face. She took a deep breath and said, Old Ito, go investigate this immediately. Hospital records, surveillance footage, every doctor and nurse who handled my case back then, as well as the caregivers, cleaners, and security staff. Find out exactly what happened. Then, what about Makoto? Leave him. Ito's father sighed as he turned. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something, but in the end said nothing and walked out the door. Ito's mother forced a slight smile, though it looked strained, and asked, What's your name? Under her gaze, I spoke my first words to her. George Wong. Ito's father, who was about to leave, suddenly turned back. Even Ito's mother sank onto the sofa. She swallowed with difficulty, her voice filled with disbelief. You're George Wong. They knew my name. That didn't surprise me. The surname Wong wasn't common in J City, and there was only one family with that name that truly stood out. Besides, back then, what happened to the Wong family had been major news. The Wong family went bankrupt, drowning in massive debt. The one in power, Orson Wong, jumped to his death. Mrs. Wong fled overseas with her eldest son, leaving behind a 5-year-old youngest son to face the creditors alone. When Ito's mother first saw me, she still had doubts. After all, any family giving birth in the same hospital as her would have to be either wealthy or influential, but judging from my appearance, I didn't look like someone from a rich family at all. However, if it was the Wong family, then everything made sense. Chapter 5. Ito's mother didn't say anything more. She asked a maid to take me to rest in the guest room first. When the guest room door closed, I heard her muffled sobs from outside. Old Ito. I don't dare to think about it. I don't dare to think that he's our son. How much has our son suffered all these years? I leaned against the soft pillow, quietly listening to her crying. For the first time in all these years, someone was shedding tears for me. When I opened my eyes again, it was already completely dark outside. George, was I too loud? Seeing that I was awake, Ito's mother, who had been sitting by my bedside, looked a little flustered. I sat up and shook my head. I had always been a light sleeper, so I had already woken up the moment the guest room door was opened. I thought she would say something when she came in, but I didn't expect her to just sit there silently for half an hour. She picked up 2 cups from the bedside table. I'm lactose intolerant. I don't know if you inherited it, so I prepared both milk and soy milk for you. I took the cup of soy milk and took a sip. It had sugar added. Very sweet. Seeing me drink it, Ito's mother curved her lips slightly and said, George, we really are your biological parents. We've already found out that it was a caregiver who mixed things up back then. Your father is still investigating whether there were any other hidden issues. But there's something I need to make clear to you. For these past 18 years, Makoto has been raised by us. I've always treated him as my own son. I interrupted her. I'll get along well with Makoto. I had read plenty of stories like this. Every pair of parents wanted their biological child, but couldn't bear to abandon the one they had raised. I understood. Even a dog raised for over a decade would be hard to let go of, let alone a person. The real son returns, but the fake one can't just disappear. After all, they had lived together day and night for over 10 years. Rather than putting them in a difficult position, it was better for me to step back first. Ito's mother stared at me blankly. Her eyes were swollen and red, as if she had cried over and over again. I lowered my head and couldn't help but let out a self-mocking smile. I didn't know whether she was crying because of the hardships I had endured, or because Makoto wasn't her biological son. But to my surprise, she didn't seem relieved at all by what I said. She spoke instead. George, listen carefully. Her voice was clear and steady. I unconsciously raised my head and met her eyes again. She stared straight into my eyes, speaking each word with absolute seriousness. I need to make this clear to you. We treated him as our own son because you and he were switched at birth. But from the moment you returned to the Ito family, you are our only son. As long as your father and I are alive, we will stand behind you unconditionally and support you. In this world, no matter who it is, if they stand against you, they stand against the entire Ito family. Your father has already asked lawyers to start legal action against the hospital and that caregiver. He's also investigating everything you've been through over the years. The suffering you endured and the losses you suffered will not be left unresolved. We will seek justice for you. I looked at her in silence. After a long while, I finally spoke. What about Makoto? She replied. We won't interfere with him anymore. As if remembering something, she smiled at me and added. Oh, right, you also have an older sister. She hasn't been able to accept this yet, so I'll wait until she fully comes to terms with it before letting her come back. I asked. What if she never accepts it? She raised her hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then said calmly. Then she doesn't need to come back ever again. I stared at her, stunned. Every word she said was something I had never even imagined. I wanted food, money, power, but I had never thought about, nor dared to hope for, family affection. I raised my hand. But before I could touch her, she suddenly pulled me into an embrace. I opened my mouth, and with a dry throat, I struggled to say, Mom. Only after saying it did I realize. My voice was choked with emotion. My mom wasn't any better off than me. She held me tightly, her earlier composure completely gone. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably against my shoulder. My son, my son. Chapter 6. It felt like I no longer had to worry about my next meal. No longer needed to stand on rooftops just to feel the wind. No longer had to live like a rat, hiding in the shadows. My parents moved quickly that very night. They cleared out Makoto's room, but they didn't let me move in directly. Instead, they hired a designer to renovate it into a walk-in closet and combined 3 adjacent guest rooms into a large bedroom just for me. Early the next morning, I was taken to transfer my household registration. Right after that came a name change, a full medical checkup, school transfer arrangements, private tutors, and even signing me up for a driver's license. I was so busy I barely had time to breathe. In just over a month of summer break, both my life and the Ito family had undergone earth-shaking changes. 3 days before school started, Makoto came back. When he arrived, Hana Ito was accompanying me in practicing spoken English. Because I had dropped out of school early to work, my academic foundation was weak. For my sake, my parents decided not to have me take the National College entrance exam. Instead, they planned for me to attend an international high school and then go abroad directly. But that would mean we'd only be together for a year before separating again. In the end, my parents decided to go abroad with me. They planned to reorganize the company's strategy for the next 5 years in advance and shift their focus overseas. So while I was busy, they were even busier. Hannah couldn't help much with that. So she volunteered to practice spoken English with me. Her voice was pleasant, and her pronunciation was perfect. But for some reason, everything sounded wrong when it came out of my mouth. She said, prepare. I repeated, pepwe, prepare, pepwe. Hannah closed her eyes in despair. We had been stuck in that room together since 8 a.m. 4 hours straight. 4 hours. And still stuck on pepwe. The person who was said to be a clean freak now looked exhausted and drained. Even worse than how I looked on the day I first arrived. Seeing her like that, I actually felt a rare trace of guilt. I said, Sis, am I just too dumb? When I go abroad, will people not understand me? Holding her head, she forced a smile and said, It's okay, little brother. If they don't understand you, that's their problem. Just as her words fell, a mocking laugh suddenly came from the doorway. You beggar, what the hell are you even saying? I turned my head and saw Makoto and his friend standing there at some point. The one who spoke was Makoto's friend. He laughed and said, Pepwe, ha ha ha. You can mess up a word that simple. Why even bother learning English? You might as well learn bird language. The two of them burst into laughter, throwing out all kinds of sarcastic remarks, but I simply looked at them calmly. Their ridicule didn't anger me at all. After the Wong family fell from grace, I had experienced things like this countless times. They were deliberately humiliating me, just to see me lose my composure. But their attack was far too weak. It didn't even stir up the slightest urge in me to fight back. Chapter 7. But in the next second, shut up. Makoto looked confused and asked, Sis, what's wrong with you? Martin just said a few truths. Why are you getting so worked up? Hana Ito frowned and stood at my side. She said, If you hadn't received the education and resources the Ito family gave you, you wouldn't even be as good as George. As if he hadn't expected her to say something like that, Makoto froze for a moment. Then he forced a smile and said, Come on, sis, I was just joking. Isn't that a bit much? Getting mad over an outsider? Hannah's brows knitted tightly. When she was angry, she carried the same cold aura as our mother. Makoto continued, No way, you don't actually think he's your brother, do you? We've been together day and night for years. He's nothing more than an outsider who just happens to be related to you by blood. Hannah immediately cut him off. He's not an outsider. He's my brother, and our parents' only son. Hearing that, Makoto stared at her in disbelief. Sis, what are you talking about? Are you mad at me too? Fine. Okay, it's my fault. All right, I was immature before, insisting on marrying Willow, but I get it now. Dad was right. I got played by her. She was just after my money. You don't know this. Sis, once my card got cut off, she immediately hooked up with several other guys. When I confronted her, she even turned it around and accused me of trying to freeload off her. I spent so much money on her, and just because I didn't have money for a few days, she called me a freeloader. Fine. She'd better not regret it. I don't want her anymore. Hana glanced at him and interrupted coldly. That's your problem. Makoto couldn't believe how indifferent she was being. He clenched his teeth, nodding angrily. Fine. You'd better not regret it either. After shouting that, he turned to leave, but Hana called out. Wait. I looked up at her. If she decided to acknowledge him as her brother again at this moment, I could only accept it. Hope flickered in Makoto's eyes once more, but Hana turned to Makoto's friend and said, Apologize to George. Huh? Apologize to me? What? Makoto was stunned. Apologize to him? Are you kidding me? Hana acted as if she hadn't heard him at all. She looked at Martin and said, If you don't apologize, I'll tell our parents that you insulted him. They might not come after you directly, but they will target your parents and your family's business. In the end, not only will you have to come and apologize, your entire family will pay the price for it. Martin only needed 2 seconds to weigh the consequences. He didn't bother chasing after Makoto, who had stormed off in anger. Instead, he walked up to me, bowed deeply, and said, I'm sorry. I apologize for what I said. His family was far beneath the Ito family. That was precisely why he was willing to be Makoto's follower. For someone from his background, reading the situation and judging the moment was second nature. When Makoto wanted to have fun, he would accompany him. When Makoto wanted to trouble someone, he would act on his behalf. But that was only when Makoto was still a member of the Ito family. I said nothing. I simply waved my hand, signaling for him to leave. Soon, the room was left with just Hana and me again. But her expression was still cold. She rolled her eyes and said in frustration, Are you just going to stand there like an idiot? He insulted you like that and you're not even angry. I smiled faintly and said, I'm used to it. Whether it was classmates, relatives, or those creditors, being threatened, cursed, beaten, or retaliated against, I had grown used to all of it. Of course, I could lash out in anger and fight back recklessly, but resistance without strength wasn't truly resistance. Hana paused. After a while, she said, George Ito, break that habit. She continued, You're part of the Ito family now. With the Ito family backing you, you don't need to hold back anymore. You can fight back without worrying about the consequences. I nodded. I understand. She said, All right, let's continue. Prepare. Pepwe. Hana was speechless. Chapter 8. Halfway through dinner, Makoto showed up again. Unlike his earlier arrogance, his face was pale, and his expression was desolate. Standing by the dining table, he lowered his head and said, Dad, I was wrong. Sir, the young master really knows he was wrong. Please forgive him. The one who let him in was one of the household maids. She had worked in the Ito family for many years and had practically watched Makoto grow up. Hearing her plead for him, I finally understood why I had always felt a trace of hostility from her. My father didn't even look up. He calmly wiped his mouth and said, Pack your things and leave. Finance will transfer your salary tomorrow morning. The maid froze in place. Sir, I was only thinking for your good. My father remained unmoved. The maid turned to Makoto and said, Young Master Ito, please say something for me. Makoto forced himself to speak. Dad, Aunt Wu has worked in our family for over 10 years. My father raised his hand and cut him off. You leave too. Makoto's face turned even paler. He knew exactly how ruthless and decisive my father could be. This man, who struck fear into the business world, never joked about things like this. Makoto completely panicked. Regret and desperation filled his voice as he said, Dad, I really know I was wrong. I'll never cause trouble for you again. I promise, whatever you ask me to do, I'll do it. I'll never act recklessly again. His voice trembled with the edge of tears, as if he had truly repented and turned over a new leaf. But my father's face remained completely expressionless. After Makoto came in, my father had already sent Hana and my mother back to their rooms. I knew he was afraid they would soften, and also afraid that seeing them soften would make me feel uncomfortable. The next second, my father's broad hand rested on my shoulder, as if he had seen through my concerns. He gently patted me, even though my parents had reassured me over and over. This past month, I still felt like Makoto might come back. The better they treated me, the more I felt like all of this was just a dream. So now, he was telling me, this wasn't a dream. He spoke slowly, clearly, word by word. Makoto, I am not your father. Makoto stared at him in disbelief. Dad, I really know I was wrong. You can't just abandon me. As if recalling something, His voice choked as he said, "Don't you remember? When I was 5, I got pneumonia and had a high fever. I was unconscious, and no medicine worked. Mom never believed in gods or spirits, but for me, she went to the temple, kneeling step by step, praying that if I could recover, she'd be willing to stay vegetarian for the rest of her life. And when I was 7, I was bullied at school, and the school covered it up. You were the one who went there to stand up for me. You fired all the teachers who protected them. Mom said she had never seen you lose your composure like that. We may not be related by blood, but we've lived together for 18 years. I've always treated you as my real father." I turned my head to look at my father. Makoto wasn't wrong. It had been 18 years, not 18 days. This wasn't something that could be erased overnight. "Of course I haven't forgotten." My father's hand tightened on my shoulder. He said, "When you were 5, the Wang family went bankrupt. Orson Wang jumped to his death, and Sandra took Bradley Wang abroad, leaving George alone in this country. On the very day your mother was praying for you, debt collectors hung him from a rooftop for an entire day, and he was only 5 years old. While you lived in comfort, well-fed and cared for, George was passed from one relative to another, never getting enough to eat, never sleeping well, constantly afraid of being thrown out. He couldn't go to school, and there was no one to stand up for him. I don't even dare to think too deeply about how he managed to survive until now. Makoto, we won't forget the past, but I will never forget what my son went through in your place." He paused, then added, "But I should thank you. You found George on that rooftop. If it weren't for you, he might not even be alive anymore. So I won't take back the money we gave you in the past, but from this point on, you and this family are finished." Makoto stared at him blankly. Then, a flash of viciousness crossed his eyes. He stood up and said, "Fine. So you're not acknowledging me anymore, is that it? Fine. You're ruthless, I get it. Whatever. I've already found my real mother anyway. If you won't accept me, I won't accept you either. I'll bring her back to the country right away. You'd better not regret this." Hearing this, my father simply waved his hand. "Show him out." Chapter 9. What happened that day felt like a brief interlude. Makoto never showed up again. The teaching style at the international high school was quite novel, and the academic pressure wasn't heavy. Aside from English, which I still struggled to fully grasp, everything else was manageable. My father had specifically spoken to the school. My advisor took good care of me. Everything was going well. It would have been perfect if not for Makoto's little followers causing trouble. "George, Makoto went through all that effort to bring you back, and this is how you repay him." The guy in front of me stepped on my chair, lecturing me self-righteously. Another chimed in. "You've got no shame. Makoto brought you back, and you kicked him out instead." The two in front of me were the same ones who had come with Makoto that day. One was called Tim Unlucky, the other Johnny Nobody. I pulled my chair away in one motion and said, "This is my home. Those are my parents. If you can't stand it, why don't you hand your own parents over to him?" They choked on their words for a second, then continued shouting. "So what if they're your parents? You've only known them for a few days." Johnny Nobody added, "Yeah, you're just a dove occupying the magpie's nest, logically speaking." Makoto was the one who had occupied someone else's place, but clearly, they weren't interested in logic. The two of them whispered in front of me, "Let's beat him up and get revenge for Makoto." Johnny Nobody nodded. "Yeah, beat him until he can't take care of himself. Then he'll beg Makoto to come back." They chose their spot well, an abandoned equipment room at school. No surveillance, no passers-by. Whatever happened here, no one would know. I quietly waited for them to finish talking. Tim Unlucky was much taller than me, and Johnny Nobody was heavier. Under normal circumstances, I should have been the one at a disadvantage today, but they didn't play by the rules, and neither did I. Before Tim Unlucky's fist could reach me, I grabbed his throat first. I had never claimed to be a good person. I had truly suffered. I had truly been taken advantage of, and I had done my share of ruthless things, more than anyone. I understood what it felt like to have no one backing you up, so I never relied on others to back me up either. The reason I survived these 18 years wasn't because of some indomitable will to live. Tim Unlucky clawed at my hand, struggling desperately. But my grip didn't budge. Lack of oxygen made his face grow paler and paler. Johnny Nobody panicked instantly. "Let go of Tim, men." The moment he lunged at me, I kicked him straight in the stomach. Ah. That kick wasn't light. Johnny Nobody slammed into the hard equipment behind him. After a cry of pain, he couldn't get back up. After dealing with him, I turned back to Tim Unlucky. Because of suffocation, his face had turned from pale to bluish. His frantic, miserable struggle was nothing like the arrogant version of him I first met. Tears and snot covered his face before it could drip onto my hand. I let go. Tim Unlucky gasped for air, collapsing onto the ground, clutching his throat as he breathed heavily. I crouched down and looked at him at eye level. I asked, "Still want to beat me until I can't take care of myself?" He shook his head wildly, like a rattling drum. Seeing that, I smiled. I said, "We're classmates. Let's get along from now on, okay?" His body trembled uncontrollably. Fear left him unable to speak. He could only nod frantically. I raised my hand and patted his head in satisfaction. Good boy. Chapter 10. Tim Unlucky and Johnny Nobody reported me to the teacher. I didn't expect them to be this shameless. They were the ones who came looking for trouble. And in the end, they actually had the nerve to complain first. When my mom got the call from the school, she said, "Impossible," 3 times in a row. That's impossible. It couldn't be my son. Absolutely impossible. No. Still impossible. I trust my son. After hanging up, she didn't ask me a single question. She just picked up a piece of pork tenderloin and placed it in my bowl. I took a bite. Heh, so sweet. After that day, Tim Unlucky and Johnny Nobody never bothered me again. Even if we happened to have the same class, they would avoid my gaze like I was some kind of plague. But today, the two of them kept circling around in front of me several times. Strangely, I could even sense a hint of smugness coming from them. During break, I dragged Tim Unlucky into the equipment room. He was cowardly but loved to stir things up. Before I even pressed him, he spilled everything. It turned out Makoto was coming to see me today. As for why, he didn't know. He only said we should wait and watch the show. That actually piqued my interest. I was curious to see what kind of show he had prepared. After school, I waited at the gate until I was almost out of patience. Before I finally saw Makoto, there was someone standing beside him. That person wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, covered up tightly despite the heat. But even so, I recognized her immediately. Sandra. Not because I had a particularly deep impression of her, but because anyone Makoto brought along was bound to have something to do with me. And among women of that age, there was only one possibility: Sandra. Makoto pointed at me. Then I saw her rush toward me. Sandra grabbed my hand excitedly and said, "George, my son, look how grown up you are now." I looked at her expressionlessly. Seeing no reaction from me, she took off her sunglasses and said, "I'm your mom." More than 10 years had passed. Yet there wasn't a trace of age on Sandra's face. I clenched my teeth. Looks like she had been living quite comfortably. She said, "George, come abroad with mom." My eyes widened. What kind of nonsense was she talking about? Sandra didn't seem to think she was being strange at all. She kept talking endlessly in front of me. "Back then, I wanted to take you with me, but the debt collectors were pressing too hard. I had no choice but to leave." "Don't blame mom. George, just come abroad with me. Life overseas is great. I've already established myself there. Let me make it up to you." I couldn't help but laugh. Laugh at myself. Back when I was little, I had actually prayed that she would come and save me. One by one, I pried her fingers off my hand and sneered. "I'm not your son." She didn't care about my attitude at all. She said, "I know, but what matters more, blood or bonds? We spent so much time together. You are my son." Anyone hearing her might think we had a deep, loving relationship. Sandra probably assumed that since I was only 5 when she left, I wouldn't remember anything. But unfortunately for her, I had a very good memory. I still remembered the way she called me useless, a jinx, and I remembered how she abandoned me in a supermarket, telling me to wait for her while she ran away. Makoto spoke up. "Ah, George, a parent's love is always the greatest. Your mom has always missed you. She only came back because she heard you were struggling here. Why don't you hurry up and go with her?" There was a strange hint of smugness in his voice. I slowly turned to look at him. I almost laughed. Did he even realize that Sandra had run away with money back then? She was a fugitive. Chapter 11. Harboring a fugitive. That counts as a serious crime, right? The moment the police appeared, Sandra and Makoto looked at me in disbelief. Sandra cried out in shock. "George, how can you be so heartless to me?" Makoto snapped at me. "George, that's your mother. You actually called the police on her." Over and over again. Just those 2 lines. I picked at my ear, too lazy to argue with them. Expressionless, I said, "Oh, who told me to be such an upright person, putting justice above family ties? One of them wanted to trick me into going abroad, then use me to extort money from my father. The other wanted me gone for good so he could return to the Ito family. No wonder they were so easily played by others. They really had beautiful dreams. Well then, they could both go in together." At the police station, I leaned back in my chair, waiting to give my statement. Tim Unlucky and Johnny Nobody stood on either side of me. One was massaging my shoulders and legs. The other was pouring tea and serving me water. "Hee. George, want a sip?" I didn't even raise my eyes, just took a sip. He asked, "Is it too hot?" I replied flatly, "It's fine." Before getting into the police car, I had dragged these 2 along with me as well. Weren't they so eager to watch the show? Might as well let them watch up close. Tim Unlucky and Johnny Nobody were easily scared the moment I mentioned things like fugitive and accomplice. They immediately panicked and followed me without resistance. When Makoto was brought out of the interrogation room, this was the scene he saw. At first, Tim Unlucky and Johnny Nobody didn't even dare look at him. Makoto flew into a rage. You bastards actually dared to betray me. But after being yelled at, their guilt completely disappeared. Tim Unlucky spat and said, "You're just a dove occupying the magpie's nest, and you still have the nerve to yell at us." Johnny Nobody immediately followed up. "Makoto, to be honest, everyone looks out for themselves. We can understand why you treated George the way you did, but let me be clear. You're not our brother. You're just a stranger. And what's a stranger? You're not our friend, not our brother, not even our enemy. We're not on the same side. From now on, you can just spend your days in prison." Makoto was left speechless, sitting there between them. I couldn't help but feel a bit like a petty villain basking in his moment of triumph. And honestly, it felt pretty damn good. But that sense of satisfaction didn't last long. My parents and my sister arrived. I quickly pushed the two guys aside and stood up properly. My mom grabbed me anxiously, checking me from head to toe. Only after confirming I wasn't hurt did she finally let out a sigh of relief. My dad, on the other hand, just glanced thoughtfully at the two of them and said nothing. I scratched my head and quickly played dumb. "Dad, did I cause trouble for everyone?" He didn't answer. He simply instructed the others to step out and handle the aftermath. Only when the room was left with just the two of us, did he look at me and slowly say, "George, in front of me, there's no need to pretend anymore." I froze for a moment and looked up. At the corner of my father's mouth, there was a barely noticeable hint of a smile. He said, "You're my son. Of course you take after me." We held each other's gaze for a moment. Then, in the next second, we both burst out laughing. Makoto and Sandra's cases were merged together. Back then, Sandra had run off with 80 million. That amount was enough for a life sentence. But because so much time had passed, many things had to be reopened and reinvestigated. By the time the verdict came, it was almost the new year. As expected, Sandra was sentenced to life imprisonment. And Bradley Wong was also brought back and arrested. As for Makoto, he was convicted of harboring a fugitive and sentenced to 4 years and 3 months. None of this affected our mood for the new year. The four of us, as a family, watched the Spring Festival Gala, counted down together, and stayed up to welcome the new year. We made our New Year wishes. Just before the countdown ended, I told my dad something. In truth, I had never really planned to jump off a building. I had seen what Orson Wong looked like after his fall. It wasn't a pretty sight. Every time I stood on a rooftop, I would imagine myself as a fish, and I would tell myself, little fish, swim fast. The whole wide world is yours to roam free."